Far Cry 2 is a game that people either can't stand or they can't stop praising, and maybe both sides are right. Previously, I talked about 2004's Far Cry, Crytek's tropical shooter packed with sci-fi mutants and cutting-edge visuals for its time. It was loud, bright, and it never took itself too seriously, especially with its B-movie dialogue. But in 2008, Ubisoft Montreal took the series in a completely different direction. Far Cry 2 stripped away the sci-fi, the bikini girl, and the tropical island, and instead it dropped players into a harsh, war-torn African landscape where your guns fail, enemies constantly respawn, and even your own body turns against you, with sudden paroxysmal attacks due to immediate malaria infection upon arriving to this country. For some, it's a masterpiece of immersion and moral ambiguity, an uncompromising vision of open-world chaos, a raw, immersive experience that feels more real than most shooters dared to be at this time. For others, it's tedious, punishing, and borderline unplayable, where frustration outweighs any fun. Today, I'm going to break down what Far Cry 2 set out to achieve, how it ended up so polarizing, and whether it really earns its status as both a cult classic and an experiment that nearly broke its own fans. Far Cry 2 drops players into the middle of a brutal civil war in a fictional African country recently torn apart by a rebellion. Two rival factions, the United Front for Liberation and Labor, or the UFLL, and the Alliance for Popular Resistance, or the APR, fight for power under the guise of liberating the people. But both are equally corrupt and ruthless organizations, leaving civilians to suffer in their crossfire. Fueling this chaos is the Jackal, a notorious arms dealer supplying cheap, reliable weapons to both sides in defiance of international agreements meant to stop the violence from escalating in these countries. To put an end to him, a team of mercenaries is sent in to find and eliminate the Jackal once and for all. In the game, you take the role as one of these mercenaries. You can choose your character, but it doesn't really change anything in the game. But the missions quickly go sideways anyway. The biggest enemy in the game, the lonesome mosquito, takes us out before the mythical Jackal can get the chance to. Stranded in an unforgiving landscape, weakened by malaria, and forced to work for both factions just to survive, you become entangled in a conflict where loyalty is meaningless and trust is a rare commodity. The deeper that you get into the work, the more you're dragged into this corrupt war zone, and it quickly becomes clear that every mission, every side that you help is just feeding the same cycle of violence. You start to wonder if killing the arms dealer at the center of it all would even matter at the end, or if someone worse would just simply come in and take his place. By the end of the first act of the game, you can feel the futility sinking in. Every act of violence you carry out raises more questions about your own role in this mess, but Far Cry 2 isn't interested in giving you any easy answers, or really any answers at all. The original Far Cry was developed by Crytek using their in-house Cry engine and published by Ubisoft in 2004. That same year, Crytek signed an exclusive deal with Electronic Arts to build their next Cry engine title, Crisis, which meant that they could no longer develop future Far Cry games. Ubisoft stepped in and struck a deal and eventually acquired the Far Cry IP outright for themselves, and this allowed their Ubisoft Montreal studio to continue the franchise independently, initially using Cry engine as a base for new console spin-offs. When planning Far Cry 2, Ubisoft Montreal wanted to do more than just make a sequel. Their goal was to completely rejuvenate the series with a fresh setting and new mechanics. Part of this was to distance the brand from Crytek's upcoming project, being Crysis, which many assumed would stick to the lush tropical environments. It was also to break away from the original game's premise and the many console spin-offs that reused the same jungle island formula. By moving to a very different setting, they hoped to reinvigorate the franchise and stand out in a market crowded with similar environments in shooter games. Ultimately, Africa offered the best mix of environment variety and narrative depth. It allowed the team to weave in authentic elements like malaria and blood diamonds, which fit naturally into the game's harsh, realistic world. To keep creative flexibility, they avoided tying the story to any single real country, and instead, they modeled the fictional setting primarily on Kenya, taking inspiration from its borders with Uganda, Ethiopia, and Tanzania for diverse terrain and climate zones. Pre-production on Far Cry 2 began even before Far Cry Instincts was finished. From concept art to full production, Far Cry 2 took about 3.5 years to develop. The project was directed by Clint Hocking, fresh off his work on Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. He saw Far Cry 2 as a chance to break away from stealth games and try something more experimental and challenging, because at the time there were few direct comparisons for what they were trying to build in terms of open world scale and systematic mechanics. On top of having a challenging, risky new premise to go after, they also competed for staff in production because in the same studio, both Assassin's Creed and Splinter Cell Conviction were in development, safer and more broadly appealing titles for Ubisoft to fund. A big mission with this project was to make the game playable on both consoles and PC, mainly to stand out from Crysis that used the same Cry engine that required high-end PCs to run well on its release. To build their vast open world, the team started with CryEngine tech, but soon realized that they needed much more. They stripped out and rewrote about 90% of the original code, effectively creating a brand new engine that they named Dunia, which means world in Swahili, a fitting name for the open world setting that they were building. They also developed a custom animation system called Live Posture, which handled natural movement for vegetation and environmental details. To fill the world efficiently and keep performance stable, they relied heavily on procedural data generation, allowing the environment to react dynamically without overloading the hardware. Hocking and narrative designer Patrick Redding developed the initial story concept alongside the planned African setting. Unlike the original Far Cry, which drew loose inspiration from H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr. Moreau and leaned into campy sci-fi, Far Cry 2 was grounded in darker literary and cinematic influences, most notably Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and its famous film adaptation Apocalypse Now. The goal was to craft a harsher, more realistic tone while keeping some surreal touches in the art design to reinforce the unsettling atmosphere. Central to Heart of Darkness is the idea of how far people will go and how monstrous they can become to survive in extreme conditions. Another major influence was Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest, where a lone protagonist manipulates and destroys both sides of a corrupt conflict. For added authenticity, parts of the game's conflict drew inspiration from real events around Nairobi, chosen as representative of border African conflicts. Voice casting reflected this too. Major characters like the faction leaders were voiced by actors native to or culturally close to their characters' backgrounds. And the prolific arms dealer named the Jackal that was profiting off fueling these conflicts was most likely based around the Merchant of Death, Victor Bout, the real-life international arms dealer. Unlike most shooters of its time, Far Cry 2 deliberately avoided traditional cutscenes and rigid plot points. Redding called this approach dynamic story architecture, a narrative that emerges through the player's actions rather than pre-scripted scenes. This required Ubisoft's management to back an unusually dedicated narrative role on the team, which Hocking successfully pushed for. A core priority was to let the players fail objectives or take unpredictable actions without breaking the story. The script was written by Suzanne O'Connor, who also worked on BioShock and Gears of War, along with Ubisoft writer Kevin Short. To deepen the buddy system in the game, Ubisoft even brought in filmmaker Malcolm Clark, known for documentaries about African mercenaries from the 70s and 80s, for some added authenticity that is so not necessary, but damn, is that some commitment. Faction leaders and lieutenants were given distinct personalities and motives so that killing them would feel impactful and affect the world meaningfully. To maintain the game's core themes, the player was deliberately prevented from attacking civilians, keeping the violence focused on the conflict's armed combatants. This commitment to a meaningful, player-driven narrative was a stark contrast to the original Far Cry, which, as we all know, was lacking in the storytelling department. The main character of that game, Jack Carver, did not return for Far Cry 2, at least in an official capacity. Focus tests show players barely remember or even liked him. Instead, Hocking and the team opted for a silent, blank slate protagonist in the style of Half-Life's Gordon Freeman to boost immersion and let players project themselves into the mercenary's shoes. As for the Jackal, he was a philosophical counterpoint to the simple cartoon villain of the first game. His character exists more as a symbol and narrative engine than a deeply personal foe. In later interviews, Hawking revealed that the Jackal was originally imagined as an older, traumatized version of Jack Carver himself, now a seasoned smuggler haunted by the horrors that he's seen on that island. Though never stated outright, this idea is reinforced in the game's themes of moral decay. And in the files of the game, the Jackal's textures are labeled as Jack Carver, so that idea was there from the start, and it was later confirmed in interviews, correcting what I said in the original video on Far Cry, where I said the Jackal was not based on Jack Carver. I was wrong. Thank you for all the comments that pointed that out to me. The goal for Far Cry's 2 design, much like its story, was to ground the entire experience in a realistic and gritty tone, a clear break from the first game's slide into science fiction. Clint Hawking wanted players to feel the raw African setting. Weapons could jam in the heat of battle, the landscape was dusty and imperfect, and settlements showed glimpses of everyday life, like farming and livestock, and your body could betray you spontaneously due to malaria sickness. Like the first Far Cry, the team aimed for advanced, responsive enemy AI. Missions were designed to be clear and flexible within an open world structure. Main objectives stayed straightforward, while optional side paths unlocked by the buddy system could fail without ending the game outright. And one of the most controversial things are the outposts scattered throughout the map. Originally, outposts were meant to slowly rebuild after being cleared, but technical challenges and the risks of players emptying the entire map led the team to use simple timed respawns instead. And I know I'm not alone in being frustrated with these outposts always being armed to the teeth even after clearing them 10 minutes ago. The malaria mechanic, another aggravating aspect in the game that was a push for realism, was meant to add constant tension in the game, though developers later admitted that it ended up more annoying than meaningful, and was toned down before the launch to avoid frequent loss of player control. So even as annoying as it was intended to be much worse, so be grateful, I guess. The unique death and rescue system also came from Hawking's frustration with harsh fail states in Splinter Cell. He wanted players to recover from mistakes without constant reloads, but still feel the risk of failure. The buddy system reinforced this by letting allies pull you from the edge of death or change mission outcomes dynamically. The soundtrack for Far Cry 2 was composed by Mark Canham, known for the Driver series, working with his Nimrod production orchestra. Ubisoft wanted something fresh and distinct from the original Far Cry, so Canham avoided big, bombastic action scores and instead focused on creating an atmospheric, more restrained sound. He combined stringed instruments with authentic African percussion instruments like udus and kalimbas, and even recruited Senegalese singer Baba Mal, who added vocals and chants that became central to the game's main theme. Like everything else in development, the music went incredibly deep to be integrated into the settings and themes of this game. Completely over-engineered, but much appreciated. Ubisoft also teamed up with Adult Swim to release a free album called African Swim, featuring South African artists and behind-the-scenes footage of the game. I just love this area of the mid-2000s game development where developers just put their all into not only making the littlest details stand out so much in games and mean so much, but also when it came to advertising their game, they went out and did like guerrilla marketing and paired with things that people actually liked. You rarely see that anymore with games. The closest thing we get now is like Fortnite skins for anything that becomes popular. Now into the meat of the game, what everybody who loves this game loves about this game, and also a source of frustration for people who don't like this game. Far Cry 2's combat is the embodiment of realism. Gunfights can be approached with run-and-gun assaults or careful stealth tactics, and the open environments allow multiple angles of attack. The gunplay itself is visceral. Weapons have strong recoil and can even jam or misfire as they degrade in quality, forcing you to be able to react on the fly or constantly be prepared by getting new weapons at supply rooms. Fights are dynamic as well, with the possibility of fire spreading to you or the enemy on purpose or by accident, having that fire trigger ammunition stacks to shoot off in every direction without discrimination, or simply blow up some gas canisters that lay around a site. If you become critically wounded in the game sometimes triggers a brutal self-healing animation, where you dig out bullets from your arm or snap bones back into place before fighting on. A mainstay for the Far Cry series from here on out. Also, at any point in the game, you may get affected by malaria attacks. Your vision blurs and your movement becomes hard to control, and the only way to stop it is to pop some malaria medication. And this can legitimately happen mid-firefight, so it gets annoying rather quickly. The gritty realism and chaos of the gameplay is a cornerstone to why this game just hits for so many people. This is also highlighted with the enemy AI in the game, particularly when you severely injure an enemy in a fight but they aren't quite dead. They will still slowly get up and grab their sidearm and try to fight with their last bit of strength, and they'll also retreat to cover if you start dropping their friends all around them and they start fighting more defensively, making you come to them or make you flush them out with some grenades, or sometimes their pathing breaks and you can't progress the mission because you can't find the guy that you need to kill that's stuck behind an airplane hangar. Was he really scared, or was that just some bad pathing in the game? The world may never know. There were a couple of minor bugs that I had in this game, like the guy stuck behind an airplane hangar, but nothing game breaking. Most of them were just funny animation glitches. One instance that I had was enemies just hopping around constantly. It was pretty funny in the intro sequence. It turns out it was just something due to modern hardware trying to play this game on PC and just needed a quick patch, but it was rather funny. The big change to Far Cry 2 from the first game is the fact that the game is truly open world. After an initial tutorial section, you're allowed to roam the entire map, essentially, compiling main story quests and side missions in whatever order that you choose. The environment covers a variety of different terrains, ranging from desert to savanna to dense jungle, with different styles of outposts and compounds in each area to allow for different ways to approach situations given the surrounding landscape. The weapons variety is insane here as well. There is no shortage of rifles, shotguns, pistols, and machine guns, sourced from all over the world. This Jackal guy really knows his stuff as an arms dealer. You got Russian assault rifles, British anti-material rifles, Swedish carbines, Italian shotguns, South African grenade launchers, and even some unique stuff like this Korean semi-auto 12-gauge shotgun, this American dart gun that is typically used to give cattle drugs from a distance, but in this game you load it up with a neurotoxin that kills silently and instantly. Or you can use a Chinese mortar system that you just carry around in your back pockets. There are also secret weapons like gold-plated AKs that function the same as regular AKs, but they degrade much slower. They also look dope as hell. The weapons variety is honestly the best part of the game and combats in general. There are so many different ways to tackle situations depending on which gun that you have on you, from silent approaches to full machine gun onslaughts, to explosive attacks from a distance. The options are endless. Also, a small detail that I really loved was when you unlock the weapons, they're all in this like supply room, so when you walk in it's just walls and walls of weapons and crates of grenades and shit. It was pretty freaking dope. I wanted to unlock all the weapons just to fill this room out. To get the weapons in the game, you can pick them up off your dead ops, but those are likely to jam and misfire with their Temu auto sears. So instead, you gotta head over to the gun depot to buy new models using the game's currency, diamonds, because of course it is. Diamonds are given to you as payment from the main story missions, but they are also found scattered around the world in shiny briefcases, and you can do some missions for some extra income as well. The real life arms dealer Victor Bout also took his payments in the form of diamonds many times because diamonds are worth a lot of money and they're completely untraceable. Advertisers call it a woman's best friend, but diamonds are truly an international arms dealer's best friend. There are a few different types of missions available to you as a mercenary, and each offers a different type of reward. There are assassination missions where you get a call from a guy with a terrible voice disguiser that tasks you with killing some random bloke for diamonds. There are convoy missions where you ambush and destroy a convoy that unlocks new inventory in the weapons shop. There are buddy rescue missions where your buddy in the game randomly gets kidnapped and you have to go rescue them, or you can just ignore that one and they die, replacing them with another buddy, so really no harm, no foul. Safe house takeover missions are where you take over a safe house that is guarded by militiamen, but once you dispatch them, you now have a new spot to save your game and stock up on some ammo. And finally, there are underground missions where you do a simple task like supply refugees with passports in exchange for malaria medication. I didn't experience this myself, but apparently, if your reputation gets too bad in the game, the underground will stop working with you and leave you without meds in the game, which seems insane because once you get these attacks, they don't go away, you just kind of pass out. I've mentioned this buddy system multiple times in this video, but I haven't really gone over what it is. But it's kind of the core thing that Far Cry 2 has that the other games in the series don't. Essentially, there are several NPCs who act as, well, buddies in the game. They serve to offer perspective and different options when doing main missions. Often, after accepting a mainline mission, they will call you up and be like, yo man, that idea is kind of dumb. Instead, you should do this, which is usually a way for you to still complete the main objective for whichever militia group you're working for, but at the same time also do something extra that benefits your buddy, because they're your buddy, I guess. Rarely is there a benefit for you to do the buddy objective other than enjoying a little more content and perspective in the mission. When trying to get across this hostile African landscape, it's similar to the first Far Cry game. You get region-specific vehicles like Land Rover Technicals, buggies, and old Datsun cars, and oddly enough, licensed Jeep models like the Wrangler and the Liberty. Oddly clean cars with the Jeep logo front and center when driving. I wonder how much Ubisoft got paid to include these things in here. Also, for doing one of the optional buddy side objectives in one of the missions in the game, you can get rewarded with a blinged out version of a Jeep Liberty from a prince. Because nothing says royalty like a $20,000 SUV with gold rims. I'd rather he just gifted me some gold-plated guns because it'd be cheaper for him, they'd be cooler, and they would actually have a function in the game. There's also a couple boats in the game, like a fan boat for rivers and lakes, and larger fishing boats that is slower but also better protected for longer rides on open water. And of course, the series staple hang glider, although I feel like it was never very satisfying in this game because there weren't many high spots to launch from when using it. Unlike pretty much every other game in the series, Africa is relatively flat. There is no minimap or on-screen compass in this game for navigation, but instead you whip out a paper map to find your way. But don't get too scared, all you youngins out there, it still functions as a GPS as well because your location is shown on the map, so you don't really need to keep track of where you are at least. But for those that do want to get sunk into the immersion of this game, you can plot your route to a location and just remember which turns you need to take on their way there. And the road signs in this game will actually be highlighted if it's the turn you need to make to get to a marked objective. Kind of a neat inclusion. There is also no traditional fast travel, which is another fault that people bash on this game, because you do spend a lot of hours behind the wheel in this game, and it's not the most enjoyable driving experience. There are bus stops across the map that you can travel to and from, but they are set stops, and even when using them, it still involves a lot of driving to get to where you need to be. They should have named this game Far Drive 2, am I right?
Oh, you stink!
Driving also involves a lot of hazards. The weather can be crazy at times, and it seems like every turn you take, there's another vehicle on the road trying to gun you down, making you have to pull over and handle it or hop onto the gun in the back if you're in one of those assault trucks. But either way, it halts the progress on an already annoying drive. And if that wasn't enough, there are outposts at nearly every major intersection on the map, requiring you again to get out of your vehicle and take out all the enemies because their gunfire will shred your car in no time, and even if you do make it by gunning through the checkpoint, they will chase you down in trucks anyway to halt your progress down the road. And for some reason, these checkpoints respawn insanely fast. You can clear a checkpoint, go a kilometer up the road for an objective, and drive back through the same checkpoint in less than 10 minutes, and it will already be remanned, needing to be cleared again. I mean, I get it. This is a war zone. You need to have reinforcements at an outpost when you lose some men there, but 10 minutes is insanity. The gameplay and details of this game are most definitely the highlight of what makes it good and frustrating, depending on what camp of people that you're in. But for me, the story is sort of mid. I think the themes of the story are good, and the Jackal's philosophy is definitely interesting, but the actual missions are inconsequential and uninteresting, and honestly, I didn't know what I was doing and who I was doing it for half the time. But maybe that is also sort of the point. Both sides, the UFLL and the APR, are so equally corrupt you can't even tell them apart. And as a mercenary just trying to keep his head above water, it's realistic to just receive orders and follow them without asking too many questions. But with that being said, I am going to vaguely go into the plots, focusing on the main beats mostly because most missions are repetitive and honestly forgettable. Far Cry 2 starts with the protagonist, a mercenary of our choosing, arriving into a war-torn African country under contract to kill a notorious arms dealer known as the Jackal, a shadowy figure who profits from the war by selling weapons to both sides. This is not a simple hit job. Almost immediately, the mercenary collapses from a severe bout of malaria, a sickness that becomes a constant nagging reminder of human vulnerability throughout this game. A big contrast to most power fantasies seen in FPS games at this time. The mercenary wakes up to find the Jackal standing over him, telling the merc that he's fired from his job and gloating about the futility of ideals in a place like this. Rather than kill his would-be assassin, the Jackal spares him, believing he poses no real threat and that he may even serve a purpose, but likely he probably thinks he will just die here and now from malaria. Soon enough, there's a militia raid. The mercenary is rescued by one of the two warring factions, those factions being the UFLL and the APR. Despite their revolutionary names, both groups are revealed to be equally corrupt, preying on the civilian population that they claim to protect. To survive and continue on in the pursuits of the Jackal, the mercenary does what he knows best. He becomes a gun for hire, working for both sides without loyalty, doing whatever jobs necessary to move forward and gain leads on his target. The game's narrative doesn't unfold through scripted cutscenes, but through the player's immersion in a world that constantly reminds them how little their choices actually matter in the grand scheme of things. Missions blend seamlessly into the open African savanna, where hostile checkpoints, convoys that provide new guns, and hidden caches of diamonds turn the land into a minefield of moral compromises and new opportunities for advancement. Also, you must constantly resupply your malaria medicine, brokered through shady deals within the local underground network. Through this underground resistance, though, you meet Ruben, a journalist trying to get the outside world to care about this country's suffering. As the fighting gets worse, the mercenary starts to realize he's not really in control of anything. The UFLL and the APR both screw him over again and again, treating him like a throwaway tool in a war that doesn't really seem to have a real cause. Even the people you thought were your friends, the buddies that you save and fight alongside, either get killed or they stab you in the back. After a while, betrayal and paranoia just starts to feel normal. About halfway through, the mercenary gets sent to take out one of the faction's leaders, but surprise, it's a setup. He's double-crossed and left for dead, until the Jackal shows up yet again, out of nowhere, to save him. Turns out, the Jackal isn't just some heartless war profiteer. Through old tapes you find scattered around, you'll start to see that he's seriously messed up over all of this chaos that he helped create. He sees himself as both the problem and maybe now the only shot at fixing it. In the final stretch of the game, the Jackal shows up one last time and lays it all out. If they want to break this cycle of violence, they've got to help the civilians escape across the border. But there's a catch. To make sure the militia doesn't follow these civilians, someone has to stay back and blow up the only road out, and someone else has to bribe the border guards to let the civilians through. And then that person has to take themselves out so they can't talk or continue on spreading this violence somewhere else. No matter what, both options are a one-way trip. The mercenary decides to work with the Jackal, split the load between the two of them, knowing that if there's any kind of redemption left, it's going to cost their lives. The game's epilogue is appropriately bleak. The factions come together to lead the country, but ultimately collapse into a leaderless anarchy. Ruben's reports are still ignored by the foreign media, so he begins leaking them online. The Jackal's body is never found, leading to question on if he too double-crossed the mercenary and continued on somewhere else without completing their pact. Some civilians manage to escape, but whether they're actually safe in whatever country that they fled to is anyone's guess. The country's future looks just as violent and messy as everything that came before, truly a lesson in futility. In the end, Far Cry 2 isn't really about being a hero. It's more like watching someone slowly lose their soul. It's a grim look at how violence feeds on itself and whether one person, no matter how well-meaning, can actually make a difference in a place that the world's already given up on. The game doesn't hand you any easy answers, just a trail of destruction and the Jackal's bleak outlook echoing in your head. As his philosophy dictates, sometimes the only way to stop the nightmare is to go down with it. Or this was all an elaborate scheme by the Jackal to have the mercenary kill himself, and the Jackal moves on without anyone else pursuing his trail. There is no denying that people love this game. Many say that this game is their favorite in the entire franchise, but I, and many others, find that stance to be crazy. I don't think Far Cry 2 is a bad game at all, but the tedious and frustrating gameplay is not something that really appeals to me. The weapons jamming too often, the frequent respawning enemies, the long driving segments, really the long driving segments are a big factor for me. The malaria attacks, and most importantly, the unfulfilling and frankly boring story just didn't really sizzle my bacon. Completing this game for the video just felt more like homework than playing a video game that is typically supposed to be fun. There were plenty moments of good gaming. The gunplay is great, the enemy AI was mostly great, the weapons variety never got stale, and the environmental design, especially the minimalism HUD approach, was awesome with the paper map and all. And of course the fire propagation was just excellent, but none of that is enough to hold up this game that is deceptively long. It's like an 18-hour game if you're doing all of the side missions, and that's a lot of time to spend not really enjoying the majority of it. I didn't play this game on release in 2008, and as I stated in the last Far Cry video, I started the series with Far Cry 3, but maybe this game just hit different in the world of gaming back then, and that makes people see it with some sort of rose-tinted glasses. Or maybe some people are just masochists in love when a game makes you miserable. It's not that outlandish of a thought, seeing how popular Souls-like games continue to be. I almost want to name the title of the video something dumb like the Dark Souls of the Far Cry series, just to get a reaction in the comments, but honestly, I can see the appeal of the game's dedication to immersion and gritty realism, even if it is to a fault for me personally. I respect the Far Cry 2 fans. But if you told me I was locked in a room for the next 24 hours and I had to play a single Far Cry game non-stop, this one would not even be a consideration for me. And it's not like I don't like difficult games. I've been obsessed with Ready or Not recently, and that's a game where if you don't check your corner by going through a room, you're gonna get shotgun blasted by some dude at a grocery store. Like, it's a tactical, methodical game, but at least in that game, your mistake is your mistake. You die because of something dumb that you did. In Far Cry 2, it's just miserable and you can't do anything about it, because whether it's just bad mechanics or just dumb shit happening, or you're just driving a very long time. I really hated the driving in this game, if you can't tell. My personal critique aside though, this game reviewed incredibly well. It was a resounding success for Ubisoft Montreal, and they immediately took feedback on what worked and what didn't in the game, and improved on things and added even more mechanics to make one of the best games in the series next. One that grew the name of the series to rapid popularity. Far Cry 3. With that being said though, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're a big fan of Far Cry 2, I hope I did not offend you too much in my closing statements, but you can just call me stupid or uneducated or bad at games in the comments. It's okay, you are probably correct. Regardless, I do hope to see you next time. Peace.